So welcome everybody to the June 2019 TELedvisors webinar. We've got a fantastic session for you today. So Kevin Lucas is a virtual heritage researcher. He works with the Gong Wanhua Indigenous Corporation, hopefully I'll pronounce that correct, Kevin, and he's a HDR student with Macquarie University. There's a current agreement with Charles Darwin University that enables the engagement with East Arnhem Land communities. So over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, and hi to everybody out there. This is the first time I've ever been exposed to this type of webinar with the community we're speaking to, so excuse me if I'm trying to stay on topic, but I think just getting a survey of what I've heard prior to this, and great to hear Jamie's sort of engagement with new apps, and I'm sort of really interested in that. And Matt, hi to Matt, you know, we haven't met before, we're on the same campus and we're meeting in a virtual space, so that's very appropriate, isn't it? I'm just waiting, Wendy, for my slides to pop up. Can you do, or do I need to do that?
Yes, sure, I can put those up. Would you like to play the video first, or would you like the slides?
No, I have the slide, and then I'll pop out of the slides into the video if I could.
Okay, just 1 minute.
Okay, so virtual heritage and Indigenous praxis, immersive storytelling and remote community engagement. It's a mouthful, and I tell you what, it's a headful too. To try and work out what really came home to me in listening to the previous presenters and their approaches is that really the frame of this work is off-grid. Everything else we've been talking about is on-grid. What we were really looking at in this project was how to create engagement in an off-grid situation within remote communities with the particular issues that the remote communities face, and how technology ended up playing a really fantastic role in doing that and achieving a lot of things that were the objectives of what Gongwana Indigenous Corporation, which is really the lead organisation in this, and their strategic sort of development ideas. They're a homeland-based community in northeast Arnhem Land, and people like Jakapura Manyaran, who is the sort of founding director of the organisation, his vision is for building a stronger future for homeland kids through Gongwana initiatives and partnerships with homeland communities in northeast Arnhem Land. So it's all basically my role within Gongwana. I'm part of the Gongwana board, was to really develop strategic partnerships, and that brought us in certainly my work at Macquarie University around my own research into virtual heritage grew out in a way out of the relationship I already had going back 30 years with the Darling Boy community and Jakapura. So immersive storytelling really at Macquarie University is where I brought these two worlds together, and then building upon that was really bringing in CDU and the Northern Institute, specifically, I guess, being led by Ruth Wallace, Professor Ruth Wallace there at the Northern Institute, in terms of looking at how do you build capacity within a remote community by using technology. But it's very much about how can technology serve that community as opposed to how can that community sort of become masters of that technology. So I think that I'm just going to play a little video that just gives you a taste or a teaser of where we're at. We've just come out of a production phase up in the community, and so I'm just going to hopefully play this. I'm going to share my screen, so I'm going to go to share my screen, and so hopefully this is going to work, and I'm going to go there, I'm going to go share, and I think when that goes black, I'm going to play.
It's up now, thanks.
So there you do see evidence of a 360 camera at the end there. Just to answer that question, to come back to my slides, do you do that, Wendy?
I'll do that, Kevin.
Thank you. So that was an unnarrated video, obviously, but it was really trying to just bring you into a sense of the isolation and the community that we're working in, and also to reinforce that really the knowledge is embedded in place within that culture, within Yolngu culture, and it's a spiritual connection to that place that is really the important reason why people are living on that, in those remote homelands. And so how do you then bring that sort of world into a virtual world, and for what purpose? It really became the sort of key issue that we started to look at, and we really partnered through my Masters of Research leading into the PhD, so the work's continuing now. But to give you a sense of where we're coming from, like the viability of remote Indigenous homelands is threatened. One critical issue is how to provision adequate infrastructure to educate children on their clan estates through a system of traditional and Western knowledge exchange known as two-way learning. By reducing the disadvantage of time and distance, new technologies offer solutions that could have a significant impact on that problem. So intergenerational knowledge exchange and digital archiving of intangible heritage are valued practices in these communities. Building on this, we asked through what process we can take a sacred cultural object and situate it within the frames of Yolngu epistemology and virtual reality. So specifically, the investigation started to articulate this process of a transmediation of a hollow log coffin, a larrakitj, known as the larrakitj, and bring that into a virtual world, and then really look at and explore the protocols that were associated with that, plus the technical challenges. And whilst doing that, to try and define a sort of a pathway of engagement for the community to develop outreach training, first of all through vet training, and then even leading into pathways into university, and then connect all that to the cultural sector to offer employment opportunities. So it's a pretty ambitious sort of scale-up project, but it's worth, if I move to my next slide, the larrakitj project became the focus, and the larrakitj project has a exhibition tour framework. We actually just presented, Ria Curry and myself presented down at the museum conference in Alice Springs in May, our project and just our processes and working. And out of that are some pretty significant partnerships are developing with major cultural institutions and museums who are going to partner with us to put that together. So we've now, through Gungwana, been able to, through this project and through the engagement with technology and through really stepping through this rather unknown way of bringing cultural knowledge, remote community, and virtual heritage together, we're really starting to find that there's some really interesting pathways for engagement for the community, but also for outside that community. So there will be a tour that will develop out of this in 2021 that will be basically a mixed reality, if you want to call it that, project. So it's really that a larrakitj was recently made. What you see in this picture is a larrakitj that was within the community that we did the prototype on. So that larrakitj has now been remade by the community or by Rikare, and that will become a centerpiece of the exhibition. And then there'll be virtual and augmented aspects to that exhibition, essentially trying to bring the outside audience into a way of engaging with the community in a multi-level sort of way. But also, the project obviously has the flip side that it's trying to develop both infrastructure and training opportunities for the community. And that's where the partnership with Northern Institute and CDU has become really important. It's really at a very early stage. We've been in discussions for over a year, and just recently we had some fairly intensive workshops looking at our process to help define a virtual heritage course outcome that will be started at a vet training level and then can be scaled up. And so there's so many different issues that it's hard to sort of isolate all of them for this. But what I thought was interesting was to at least look at Gungwana Indigenous Corporation's structure and what their priorities are. And really that's what has been leading the project as opposed to technology. It's just that technology has been interwoven into their needs and is helping produce the outcomes they were looking for. So Indigenous governance, training and education, and Gungwana productions are the three sort of areas of engagement that Gungwana defined itself as having and how to develop their own capacity. So Indigenous governance is really about self-determination and sustainability. Training and education is about partnerships, and Gungwana production is about engagement and employment. So, as Ria Curry says, Gungwana is about learning, talking, sharing old and new knowledge to feed ideas out of the world and build the partnerships for the future. Knowledge and imagination is the future of our homelands. So here you can see quite clearly demonstrated on the screen, you know, Ria Curry being involved in traditional body painting in a dapi, an initiation ceremony, to leading a group on a process in remote communities called Learning on Country. So, you know, half the education is basically out in the community. It's looking at the traditional knowledge and then finding ways in the classroom to bring that knowledge into an educational framework. And so technology just becomes another part of that. iPads have been there for some years now, and now the virtual reality, augmented reality technology and processes is really trying to capture what is the living practice out there, which is, you know, the bungal, the dance, the songs, the stories, and the connection to place, and then bringing those elements together in an educational framework. So recently the homeland schools, I don't know how many of you know much about the homelands in that area, but there's 19 in the Lanapoi Indigenous protected area. There's 19 homeland schools. So the headmistress of that, or the principal of that homeland schools, has now assigned the senior kids at Darling Boy to become part of this virtual heritage training course that we're developing with CDU. And this project will be like a pilot as we develop it over the next 2 years, and then the aim is to then extend that out into other communities as well. And they're already.
We have about 5 minutes, Kevin. Thank you.
Okay. So just to slip on to the next one. So really, just to reinforce that the processes in the community are about learning on country. What we start to do is to then translate, as you saw in the video, not only the storytelling is contained in the songs. We break that down into we translate that Manakay into English, and then use it as a basis for two-way learning and developing stories. And that's done on country. The training and education then gets reinforced with technology. And one of our greatest challenges, clearly, delivering technology, being off-grid, and how we train and create workshops. So our first iteration of that was really in the just in the last 3 months, and but with the strong partnership of CDU, and that's the only way you can take these type of things forward, I think, is to help a small organisation like Gongwana develop ambitious projects like this, which the community is totally engaged with. And clearly the production, the touring, all leads to employment and income outcomes that sort of help develop sustainability for remote communities. Engagement, it speaks to the closing the gap issues, it speaks to the roadmap for Indigenous engagement that the GLAM sector has just put out. So it's really just looking at how technology, and this project is certainly proving it in remote communities, be used to scale up, I guess, the ambition of what the community wants to do and achieve itself. So that's a pretty poor slide. I hope it's clearer at your end. But that's probably the end of my general rave. I can take a few questions. So over to you, Wendy. Is there any questions?
Thanks so much, Kevin. That's a really good presentation and insight into the project. It just occurred to me that while it seemed to be quite easy to have our first speaker join from her travelling spot in the US, it was quite a struggle, and I would have liked to have Tommy, your co-person in this project, to actually introduce the project from East Arnhem Land, which is physically much closer than what Jamie is, but a world away in technology and the ability to connect. So thank you so much for sharing. There was a couple of questions.
Yep.
Let me just find them. Jeanette asked, I'm wondering how and when in the video would you introduce cultural and ethical protocols to guide engagement in its use?
Well, the videos, it's not so much a video that we're talking about. That really I just gave as an example of what we've done, and it's been shared with CDU. And as I say, that video has just come out of a recent phase of development, and we use that as a museum presentation. So, but what we've actually created as a prototype is a virtual reality work that was developed in Oculus Rift, but can be viewed in Oculus Go. And when you come into it, it's a virtual museum essentially, and you come in, and as you arrive into that space, there's an Indigenous content warning, and then you get a choice at this stage in the prototype of going into the development side or the gallery experience side. And the gallery experience side basically brings you into a gallery. You see the larrakitj, you are welcomed by Tommy in language and brought in that, and he becomes a virtual avatar. And so we've been motion capturing his voice and his motion. They'll be mapped to that character. So you'll meet him in that space. He brings you into a gallery where you can interact with the larrakitj. The larrakitj has obviously got a lot of embodied knowledge, embedded knowledge into it, that all those designs on it are really speaking to different stories, different ancestral stories, but speaking to a particular place called Warrawa. And that is sort of becomes the center of focus for how we develop it out in the community. So yes, clearly there are Indigenous protocols to be gone through, but that's what guides this project from the ground up, actually, because it is being led by and owned by Gongwana Indigenous Corporation.
Great. There's just another question there. How much adaptation did you have to make the story for the technology?
Well, adaptation in the sense that we're really, that's sort of part of what we're developing in the second phase, is how to develop the stories. I mean, what we did is use the first iteration, the first prototype really is a defined process. And through defining process, we also defined needs, and therefore we then had a clearer picture of where we had to go and look for strategic partnerships. So we certainly identified that we need technical partners and technology partners, and training and education partners. So that's led us to CDU and other searching out those sort of partnerships. But the storytelling itself started by translating the Manichae and the songs, and you saw a shot of that in the video with the linguistics team, a Yolngu linguist, or two Yolngu linguists. One's a Yolngu person and one's a Japanese linguist at CDU, and they were working with both Jakapura and Tommy to translate those Manichae. And then that becomes the basis of the storytelling. We take it out to the community. Then the kids start looking at that. And I mean, we're sort of talking intergenerational knowledge exchange. So it's not just high school kids, it's youth who have left school, and it's sort of the elders as well. But looking at how to take those traditional stories and then develop that. So partly it's an imaginative leap, and partly it's a sort of traditional knowledge frame, but it really led by the Yolngu in their learning on country process. So that's how it's being developed.
Great, thank you very much. If that's all we have time for today, if people could give a round of applause in the chat for Kevin.
Thank you.